Classified Crime is on the case of Sarah Boone, and today we will analyze her phone calls from April 2025. Okay, so the last call of March was to Christina Pena, and it was not accepted. So we're starting off April 1st. A call to Nicole, not accepted. Then she called her brother, not accepted. And then on the 1st, Peter, they talked for just about 30 minutes. After Peter, she called her son. It was not accepted. She called him again 2 minutes later. It was not accepted. And then she called him again on the 1st, a few hours after that, and that was also not accepted. And then she called Nicole again on the 1st, and they spoke for a full 30 minutes. So all of those on April Fool's Day. On April 2nd, she called her brother, not accepted. She called Peter. They spoke for about 30 minutes. She called Peter again. They spoke for about 30 minutes. And then on the 2nd, she called her brother, not accepted. Called her brother again. They spoke for just about 2 minutes. And that was just 6 minutes after she made the first call. And those are all the calls for the 2nd. On the 3rd, she called Peter, not accepted. Then her son, not accepted. Her son again, not accepted, 2 minutes apart. Then Peter, not accepted. Then her son on the 3rd, and they spoke for about 30 minutes in the afternoon. Then on the 3rd, she tried her son again, and it was not accepted. And then she called again on the 3rd, her son, not accepted. And on the 3rd, she called her son again at 2026, 2 minutes later. So that was 2022, 2024, 2026, all three not accepted. On the 4th, she called him at 8:22 in the morning, not accepted. The next call, I don't recognize this number. 2 minutes later, she made a mystery call, not accepted. Then 2 minutes after that, she called her son on the 4th, not accepted. Then she called Billy Lane at 8:29 in the morning, her investigator that was court appointed, and that was also not accepted. But that's the only time I've seen her call Billy Lane. This was on April 4th. She then called Nicole on the 5th, and that was not accepted. Someone with the last name Smith, they spoke for 1 minute. Then she called her son on the 5th, not accepted. This is at 2 in the afternoon, so then she called him 2 minutes later, not accepted. Then Brian on the 5th, and they spoke for 24 minutes. And then she called her son again on the 5th, not accepted. And then her son again, 2 minutes later, not accepted. She then called Peter. And they spoke for about 23 minutes, and that was her last call on the 5th. On the 6th, she called her brother. It was not accepted. Then she called her son, and they spoke for about 18 minutes. Then she called her son again. It was not accepted. She called her son again on the 6th, not accepted. Then Brian, not accepted. Then her son, not accepted. Then Brian, not accepted. So she did talk to her son for a little over 18 minutes on the 6th at 14:24. So that would be 2:24 p.m. And then at 3:31, 3:33, 3:35, 3:37, and 3:39, she called them back to back, not accepted. And then up here on the 6th, she called her brother, and they actually spoke for 17 minutes, 40 seconds. And then Sarah hung up. Then she called her son again at 16:52, which would be 4:52 in the afternoon, not accepted. Then Brian at 4:54, not accepted. Then her son at 4:57, not accepted. And then Brian at 4:59, not accepted. All on the 6th. Then her son at 5:30, she starts calling in the afternoon, and that was not accepted. Then Brian, 5:32, not accepted. Then she tried them again at 19:03 or 7:03 p.m., not accepted. 7:07 p.m., not accepted. 7:09 p.m., she called Brian, not accepted. So her son, then Brian. Then Brian again at 7:10 p.m. Then Brian again at 7:13 p.m., all not accepted. Then her son at 7:15 p.m., not accepted. And then we get to the 7th. So on the 6th, she did speak to her son in the afternoon briefly. And then she proceeded to call between her son and Brian 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 more times in one single day. Can you imagine trying to go about your day and getting 17 calls from a single person between you and your child? If that's not harassment, I don't know what is. All right. Peter on the 7th. They spoke for about 4 minutes and 42 seconds. Peter again, they spoke for almost 30 minutes. Her son, not accepted. This is 4:39 in the afternoon. And then we see our favorite pattern here. So she calls on the 7th, 4:39. Then her son at 4:41, not accepted. Then Brian at 4:42, not accepted. Then Brian at 4:44 p.m., not accepted. Then her son, 4:46, not accepted. She gives him a little bit of about an hour, and then she calls her son again at 5:31, not accepted. And then this is the 8th. She called her son at 9 in the morning on the 8th, not accepted. Then she called Brian. They spoke for just under 5 minutes, and Brian hung up on the 8th. Then she called Nicole. They spoke for almost 30 minutes. And then Peter, not accepted. And then Peter, almost 30 minutes. She called 1 minute later, and they spoke for 30 minutes. And then she called Peter again, and they spoke for almost 30 minutes. And then Peter again on the 8th, and they spoke for about 14 minutes. So they had quite a bit of talking on the 8th. On the 9th, she started with Brian. They spoke for just under 9 minutes, and Sarah hung up. And then on the 9th, she called Brian again. They spoke for about 8 minutes, and Brian hung up. She tried Christina Pena on the 9th. It was not accepted. And then Billy Lane again, she contacted on the 9th. It was not accepted. I'm not sure why she's contacting Billy, maybe because she's trying to get in touch with someone from her legal team and she was hoping he would know something. I don't know. But he's not accepting the calls. She then called Nicole on the 10th, and then it says inmate hung up, but there's no call duration. She called someone named Jennifer. It was not accepted. She called Nicole again on the 10th, and they spoke for 22 minutes, 34 seconds. She spoke to Nicole again, and it says pin limit, no duration. On the 10th, she called Nicole again. They spoke for exactly 30 minutes, and it says time up. Then she called her son on the 11th, spoke for about 12 and a half minutes, and the son hung up. Then Peter on the 12th, it says time up, so they spoke for the full 30 minutes. Then she called her son. It says pin limit and no duration on the 12th. On the 13th, she called Nicole, and it was not accepted. Then on the 13th, she called her son. They spoke for just under 30 minutes. Then Nicole, they spoke for just 4.5 minutes. Then Nicole again, they spoke for a full 30 minutes until time was up. This is on the 14th. Also on the 14th, she calls her son. They speak for just over a minute. She called her son again. They spoke for 1 second. And then she called her son again, and it says pin limit, so no duration there. So maybe she was running out of time. Nicole, she starts out on the 17th, so no calls on 15, 16, but she calls Nicole 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times on the 17th. 5 calls to Nicole. They spoke for 30 minutes the first time. No duration the second 2 times, but it says inmate hung up. No duration the 4th time here, but it was not accepted by Nicole. And then the 5th call, they spoke for just about 30 minutes and Sarah hung up. Then on the 17th, she called her son and they spoke for just about 21.5 minutes. And that was the last call she made on the 17th. On the 18th, she called her son. It was not accepted. This is almost 9 in the morning. Brian on the 18th, she called him 1 minute later, not accepted. Then her son, 2 minutes later, not accepted. Then Brian, 2 minutes later, not accepted. Then Brian, 2 minutes later, not accepted. Then Brian, 2 minutes later, not accepted. I mean, they could not even be up yet if it's the weekend. Let's see. And then she called Peter on the 18th. Not accepted. Julian, not accepted. Brian again on the 18th at 9:06. The last call she made to Brian was 9. So she tried 2 other people and they didn't pick up. So then she called Brian again. Not accepted. And then on the 18th, she tried her son right after 2 minutes after Brian. Not accepted. They're not available. Peter on the 18th, they spoke for about 20 minutes. Then she called her son again on the 18th, not accepted. So this is later in the afternoon. She's trying him again. And then she called Brian 2 minutes later. They spoke for about 5.5 minutes. And then Brian hung up. On the 19th, she called Nicole twice. The first call lasted half a minute. And then they spoke for about 30 minutes. Then on the 19th, she called her son, not accepted. Her son, 1 minute later, not accepted. She called Brian. They spoke for 6 minutes and her time was up. So I don't know if she needed more funds or she just ran out of time for the day. Then Nicole, it says pin limit, no duration on the 20th. Also on the 20th, she called Nicole again and they spoke for 29 minutes, 43 seconds. She then called Julian. No duration, not accepted. Then she called her brother. They spoke for about 10 minutes and then her brother hung up. Also on the 20th, she tried Julian. It was not accepted. Then her son, not accepted. And then 1 minute later, Brian, not accepted. On the 20th, she then called Peter 3 times back to back. They spoke just under 30 minutes twice in a row. And then the last time, there's no call duration and it says inmate hung up. On the 21st, she called her son. They spoke for 13 seconds and then inmate hung up. This says it was her free call. Okay, here on the 21st, she attempted her son again 2 minutes later. And it says she hit her pin limit. So it looks like she attempted to call him. They spoke for 13 seconds. It says that was a free call, but then she tried to call back and it hit her pin limit. So that looks confusing to me. And then on the 21st, she called her son back later on, about an hour later, and they were able to speak for about 30 minutes. So she must have got some funding added to her call logs. Then on the 22nd, she called Nicole and they spoke for 26 minutes. On the 23rd, she called her son. They spoke for just under 30 minutes. On the 24th, she dialed a wrong number, I think, because it was just 1 digit different from Nicole's number and there was no answer. And then she immediately called Nicole after that and that was not accepted. She then called Peter on the 24th. twice, 2 minutes apart. It was not accepted the first time, and then they spoke for just under 3 minutes. She then called Nicole on the 25th. They spoke for exactly 30 minutes. She called her son on the 25th. It was not accepted. She called her son and talked for 7 seconds, and then her son hung up. She called her son again and spoke for 3 minutes, 45 seconds, and then her son hung up. She then called Peter, and it said pin limit, so there's no duration there. Then she called Peter again. It was not accepted. Then on the 25th, later on, she called her son again. They spoke for 1 second, then 30 minutes. So 1 second on the 25th. Then on the 26th, they spoke for 30 minutes. And then she called him later on in the afternoon, and they spoke for 30 minutes again. So she talked to him that morning and afternoon of the 26th of April. Then she contacted Nicole on the 27th. It was not accepted. Her son on the 27th, and they talked for about 4 minutes. Then she called Nicole on the 28th, and they talked for 4.5 minutes, and that says it was a free call. And then again, she dialed that wrong number, 1 digit different from Nicole, and there's no duration, but it says inmate hung up. I think she was trying to call Nicole back, but dialed 1 digit off. And then on the 28th, she called Nicole again. They spoke for 28 minutes, 51 seconds. Then she called Peter on the 28th. They spoke for about 21 minutes. She called Peter again. It was not accepted. She called Peter again. They spoke for about 30 minutes. She called Peter again. It was not accepted. And she called Peter again, and they spoke for about 28 minutes on the 28th. So there were several calls to Peter on the 28th. It looks like 5 or 6, 5. She then called Nicole on the 29th. They spoke for 8 minutes, 43 seconds. And then again on the 29th, they spoke for 30 minutes. She called Peter on the 29th. They spoke for exactly 30 minutes. She called her son on the 29th, and it was not accepted. She then called Brian on the 29th. 2 minutes later, it was not accepted. Then her son, about an hour later, not accepted. And then Brian, 2 minutes after that, not accepted. Then she called her son again on the 29th, 2 minutes after that, and they spoke for 5.5 minutes. And then on the 29th, she called her son again, and they spoke for about 30 minutes. So it looks like she was trying to get someone to answer. And then we have 2 more calls this month. She called Peter on the 30th, and they spoke for 30 minutes. And then she called Peter again on the 30th, and they spoke for about, let's see, I wrote over it. Let me see here. They spoke for about 21 minutes and 52 seconds. And then we get to the month of May, and she calls Brian as her first call for May 1st. It was not accepted, and that was her free courtesy call. So we'll pick back up with May next time. For the April call totals, we can see she called Julian a total of 3 attempted calls. He accepted none of those. So 0% of the time Julian accepted Sarah's calls. He's setting firm boundaries. He's letting her know he doesn't have any more time for this foolishness, and I really like his energy. Peter, she called, attempted 30 times. He accepted 20 of those times for 2/3 or 67% of the time. Peter is becoming a doormat, in my opinion, and just bending at the will of whatever Sarah is insisting he do. I'm pretty sure he is the one funding all these calls. Her brother, she attempted to call 6 times. He answered 3 times, so about 50% of the time. But she also is learning that he cannot just be called back to back, and he doesn't have unlimited time in the day to talk. Christina Pena, she attempted 1 time in the month of April, and it was accepted 0 times, so 0% of the time. So I think she's having a very hard time getting a hold of Christina. Christina's busy, and Maybe they're talking through tablet messages instead. I don't know. But during the month of April, she only tried to call her one time. Brian, she attempted 24 calls. He accepted 6 of them. So 25% of the time, he's attempting boundaries as well. Her son got the most calls from her of 58 total attempted calls for the month of April, and he accepted 18, so 31% of the time. Nicole, she attempted to call 28 times, and Nicole accepted 18, so 64% of the time. So Nicole and Peter are the two biggest acceptors of her phone call shenanigans. Okay, so for those of you who stayed to the end of the video, I do have a little bit of some updates. Last video, we looked at her March phone calls, and I told you I was going to request some more records for Sarah and another inmate. So this is the other inmate that I was looking at. Her name is Bree Boone. She's also at Lowell Annex in close custody and sentenced to life. She arrived on October 22nd, 2024. Her trial, it ended right as Sarah's was kind of getting started. So she got there like 2 months before Sarah. You can see her charges or offenses here. First degree, premeditated or attempted, and she was sentenced on September 27th, 2024. And she is from Santa Rosa County, where James Owens was practicing. And you can see she is sentenced to life. So I requested her phone records in addition to Sarah's. She may or may not know Sarah, but they do. They are in the same kind of confinement, the area. But I requested her phone records so we can kind of compare how much Sarah is on the phone versus another inmate that's in her same kind of population. And this inmate was of interest to me because she did claim battered spouse. She also used Dr. Julie Harper as her expert. She did not end up having Dr. Julie Harper testify, and Bree Boone also chose not to testify in her case. But it was interesting that they used the same expert. They both claim battered spouse. They both are sentenced to life and ended up at the same facility. So let's take a look at her phone record totals compared to Sarah's. Okay, so this is the report from Bree Boone. You can see her name here. Her intake date was 10/22/2024, or her first date she was able to make calls. You can see that this report was run up here at the top on July 16th, 2025. And the total duration of all of her calls from October 22nd through July 16th is 35 hours, 25 minutes, and 18 seconds. Okay. So that's Bree Boone. Also, I'd like to point out that Bree does have 3 young children she might be calling to speak to. So this is just to give us kind of a perspective. So she does have family that she could be calling to speak to. I haven't gone through all of her records and see who she's calling like I did Sarah, but this is just kind of a comparison. Now, here is Sarah's latest call report that I got, ran the same day, July 16th, 2025. She has 111 hours, 2 minutes, and 39 seconds of phone calls. And her phone call logs, I don't believe, start until January 2nd. So January 2nd up until July 16th. Yes, January 2nd. So I did not want to scroll all the way down 54 pages, but I skipped here. January 2nd through July 16th. This is how long Sarah has talked on the phone. 111 hours, 2 minutes, 39 seconds. And just to recap from last time, we looked at the Florida Department of Corrections inmate telephone system. How you create your account, but the fees, every time someone adds funds, there's a 99-cent fee. The per minute rate for voicemails from friends and family or telephone calls is 13 and a half cents. Okay. So if we do some quick calculations, so 111 hours times 60 minutes is this 6,660 minutes times 13 and a half cents. So that's $899.10. That does not, they do get 10 minutes of free calls per month. So that doesn't account for that. And then there was like, I think 2 more minutes. So another few cents there. But just to give you a ballpark, that's $900 she spent on phone calls. And that money came from somewhere. So let me know what you guys think about Sarah's April phone call logs and her cost in comparison to another inmate in her same kind of situation. And thank you so much for watching as always. I will see you in the comments.